It all started on a Thursday night, during one of those late-night talk shows that people either love or pretend not to watch. You know the kind, where sharp humor meets politics, and everyone's just waiting for the next big moment to unfold. This particular episode was no different, except it turned out to be way more explosive than anyone expected. Representative Jasmine Crockett had been invited as a guest on the Gutfeld show. She walked in with her usual confidence, ready to talk about the latest headlines and maybe drop a few zingers along the way. Crockett wasn't new to this game. She'd built a reputation for speaking her mind, whether people liked it or not. But little did she know, something she said would light up social media faster than anyone could have imagined. As the conversation went on, the topic shifted to rising political figures. That's when things got interesting. Someone brought up Karoline Leavitt, a young conservative commentator who'd been making waves online. Leavitt was still relatively new to the scene, but had already earned respect for holding her ground in tough interviews. To some, she represented fresh energy in politics, a voice unafraid to challenge the status quo. But to others? Well, let's just say opinions varied. Crockett didn't hold back. With a smirk, she leaned into the mic and said, "Karoline Leavitt, honestly, I don't see what all the fuss is about. Seems like just another lightweight trying to make noise without much substance." The audience chuckled nervously, unsure if they were supposed to laugh or cringe. It seemed like a throwaway line at first, the kind of jab politicians often toss out during debates, but Gutfeld sitting across from her immediately perked up. If you've ever watched Gutfeld, you know he has a knack for turning small moments into big ones. He's quick-witted, funny, and doesn't shy away from calling people out. And right then, his eyes lit up like he'd just found gold. Leaning forward slightly, he responded with a sly grin. "Oh, Congresswoman, you might want to rethink that one, because trust me, you've just stepped into something bigger than you realize." At first, viewers weren't sure what to make of it. Was this just another playful exchange between two strong personalities, or was there something deeper brewing beneath the surface? As the segment continued, Gutfeld kept circling back to Crockett's comment, dissecting it piece by piece. He argued that dismissing someone like Leavitt based purely on age or experience was unfair, and worse, it missed the point entirely. Young voices, he pointed out, are crucial in shaping the future of politics. Mocking them only shuts down meaningful conversations before they even begin. By the time the show ended, Twitter was ablaze. People couldn't stop talking about what had happened. Some defended Crockett, saying she was simply calling it as she saw it. Others sided with Gutfeld, praising him for standing up for younger voices. Meanwhile, clips of the exchange were shared thousands of times, each caption adding its own twist to the story. Memes flooded timelines, and hashtags like "Dar's Lightweight Gate," yes, someone actually came up with that, began trending. Backstage, though, the real drama was just beginning. Word spread quickly that Gutfeld planned to dedicate an entire episode to the fallout. He teased it on air, promising viewers a deep dive into why comments like Crockett's matter and why they can sometimes do more harm than good. Fans eagerly tuned in, curious to see how far he'd take it. Would he bring in experts, play more clips, or maybe even invite both women onto the show for a face-off? For Karoline Leavitt watching from home, the situation felt surreal. She hadn't asked for any of this attention. All she'd done was share her thoughts on issues she cared about, hoping to contribute to the conversation. Now, suddenly, she was at the center of a national debate. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from friends, family, and supporters. Everyone wanted to know, what was she going to do next? Leavitt took a deep breath. She knew this was her chance to respond, not just to Crockett's words, but to the larger issue of how young voices are treated in politics. Instead of lashing out or playing victim, she decided to stay calm and focused. After all, actions speak louder than words, and as the days unfolded, it became clear that this was only the beginning of a much bigger story, one that would challenge stereotypes, spark important discussions, and remind everyone why fairness matters in public discourse. Little did anyone know, the best was yet to come. The moment the episode aired, it was like tossing a lit match into a room full of dry leaves. Social media exploded. People couldn't stop talking about what had just happened, Some were quick to jump on Jasmine Crockett's side, applauding her for calling out what they saw as overhyped personalities in politics. "She's right," one tweet read. "Not everyone deserves a platform just because they're young." Others, however, were furious. They felt Crockett's comment came across as dismissive and condescending, especially toward someone who had worked hard to earn their place at the table. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt found herself smack in the middle of the storm. She wasn't expecting this kind of attention. In fact, she was sitting at home when the clip started making rounds online. At first, she didn't know how to react. Should she ignore it, respond, call it out? After some thought, she decided to address it, but not in the way people expected. Instead of firing back with anger or frustration, she took to Twitter and wrote something simple yet powerful. "I respect differing opinions, but mockery has no place in meaningful discourse. Let's focus on ideas, not insults." That single tweet changed everything. It wasn't long before it went viral, racking up thousands of likes, retweets, and comments. Supporters flooded her mentions, praising her for handling the situation with grace. Even people who hadn't paid much attention to her before were now curious about who she was and what she stood for. Overnight, Leavitt became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that staying calm under pressure can sometimes speak louder than any comeback. Greg Gutfeld, watching all of this unfold, knew he had struck a nerve. The next day, he came back stronger, dedicating his opening monologue entirely to the controversy. Sitting behind his desk with that signature smirk, he leaned into the camera and said, "You know, folks, there's a difference between disagreeing with someone and tearing them down, and last night we saw exactly where that line gets crossed." He didn't hold back. Using video clips from previous interviews, Gutfeld showcased moments where Leavitt held her own against seasoned journalists and political analysts. He highlighted her ability to articulate complex ideas clearly and confidently, proving that she wasn't just some lightweight trying to make noise. In fact, he argued, she was doing exactly what politicians are supposed to do: engage, listen, and offer solutions. But Gutfeld didn't stop there. He also pointed out the double standard at play. "Let's be honest here," he said, raising an eyebrow. "If a young liberal commentator walked onto a panel and got dismissed like this, we'd have half the country screaming about ageism and bias. But when it happens to someone on the other side, suddenly it's okay?" His words hit home. Viewers nodded along, realizing how often these kinds of biases slip through unnoticed. By framing the issue this way, Gutfeld wasn't just defending Leavitt. He was sparking a larger conversation about fairness and representation in politics. Was it fair to judge someone solely based on their age or experience level? Or should we instead focus on the quality of their ideas and how well they communicate them? As the segment aired, reactions poured in from all corners of the internet. Conservatives praised Gutfeld for standing up to Crockett, while liberals accused him of exaggerating the situation for ratings. But one thing was undeniable: people were paying attention. The debate spilled over into morning shows, podcasts, and even dinner tables across America. Friends argued over coffee, families debated during Sunday brunch. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, and everyone wanted to share it. For Jasmine Crockett, the backlash was relentless. She appeared on several news programs the following day, doubling down on her original remarks. "Look," she said, crossing her arms defiantly, "I stand by my critique. Karoline Leavitt is being propped up by partisan machines, not merit." Her tone was firm, almost challenging, as if daring anyone to contradict her. But instead of quelling the fire, her comments only added fuel to it. Critics quickly pointed out the contradictions in her argument. If Leavitt truly lacked substance, why had she performed so well in tough interviews? Why had she managed to win over skeptics with thoughtful answers and clear reasoning? Clips of her past appearances began circulating again, this time with captions like, "Still think she's a lightweight," and "Maybe we should let her speak for herself." Even hosts who initially agreed with Crockett started to waver. One anchor on a popular morning show asked bluntly, "Do you think dismissing her outright does more harm than good? Because It feels like you're shutting down dialogue rather than encouraging it." Crockett hesitated, searching for the right words. For the first time, cracks began to show in her confident facade. Back on the Greg Gutfeld show, the host couldn't resist poking fun at the unfolding drama. "You know," he joked during another segment, "if Congresswoman Crockett wanted to boost Karoline's profile, she really nailed it. I mean, talk about unintentional marketing." The audience erupted in laughter, but there was truth in his humor. Every time Crockett tried to defend herself, she inadvertently drew more attention to Leavitt and to the flaws in her own argument. By the end of the week, the story had taken on a life of its own. Late-night comedians turned it into material for their routines. Memes comparing Crockett's comments to playground taunts popped up everywhere. Even late-night diners debated whether her critique was justified or just plain mean-spirited. What started as a casual remark on a talk show had snowballed into a nationwide discussion about respect, generational divides, and the importance of fostering new voices in politics. For Greg Gutfeld, this was more than just entertainment, it was validation. His show had become a platform for highlighting issues that mattered, even if they came wrapped in humor and satire. Ratings soared as viewers tuned in nightly to see what he'd say next. Would he invite Leavitt onto the show? Would Crockett respond directly? No one knew for sure, but everyone was hooked. And somewhere in the midst of all this chaos, Karoline Leavitt sat quietly, watching it all unfold. She knew this was her moment, not to gloat or seek revenge, but to prove that she belonged in the conversation. Whatever happened next, she was ready. As the days rolled on, the controversy didn't just simmer, it roared. Jasmine Crockett's comments about Karoline Leavitt had turned into a national talking point, and it seemed like no one could escape the debate. Whether you were scrolling through Twitter, flipping channels on TV, or chatting with coworkers over lunch, the topic was everywhere. What started as a casual jab on late-night television had now become a full-blown cultural moment. For Crockett, things weren't going well. She tried to stay composed, showing up on morning shows and news panels to defend her stance. But every time she spoke, it felt like she dug herself deeper into a hole. Her argument sounded rehearsed, almost robotic, as if she was reading from a script rather than speaking from the heart. When asked why she thought mocking someone's experience was productive, she stumbled over her words, saying things like, "I'm just pointing out reality." But to many viewers, it came across as defensive and out of touch. Meanwhile, Greg Gutfeld continued to hammer away at the issue on his show. Night after night, he dissected Crockett's remarks, breaking them down piece by piece. He wasn't just poking fun anymore, he was making a case. Using video clips, expert opinions, and even audience reactions, he painted a picture of how dismissive comments can stifle important voices. "Let's say you're young," he said during one segment, leaning forward with mock seriousness. "You've got ideas, energy, and passion. But someone tells you your voice doesn't matter because you haven't been around long enough. How does that help anyone?" The audience ate it up. They clapped, laughed, and nodded along, hanging on to every word. Gutfeld had a way of turning complex issues into relatable stories, and this time was no exception. He framed the debate not just as a clash between two personalities, but as a broader conversation about fairness and opportunity. Who gets to decide? Who deserves a seat at the table? And why do we often judge people before they've even had a chance to speak? But while Gutfeld kept the spotlight burning bright, the real game changer came when Karoline Leavitt decided to step into the arena herself. Up until now, she'd mostly stayed quiet, letting others fight her battles for her. But this time, she chose to take control of the narrative. She accepted an invitation to appear on the Greg Gutfeld show, marking her first major television appearance since the controversy erupted. People couldn't wait to see how she'd handle the pressure and whether she could live up to the hype. The night of the interview arrived, and anticipation was sky high. Viewers tuned in from all sides of the political spectrum, curious to see what would happen. Would Leavitt come off as confident and articulate, or would the nerves get the better of her? As she walked onto the set, smiling warmly and shaking hands with Gutfeld, it was clear she wasn't afraid. Dressed professionally but comfortably, She carried herself with the kind of poise that made you forget she was still relatively new to the national stage. Gutfeld kicked things off with a light-hearted tone, joking about how much attention she'd received lately. "So, Karoline," he began, flashing his trademark grin, "how does it feel to go from relative unknown to household name overnight?" Leavitt chuckled, clearly at ease. "To be honest," she replied, "it's been overwhelming but also humbling. I never expected any of this, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my perspective." From there, the conversation shifted to the heart of the matter. Gutfeld asked her directly about Crockett's comments, giving her a chance to respond in her own words. Instead of taking the bait and launching into a fiery rebuttal, Leavitt took a deep breath and answered thoughtfully. "I respect differing opinions," she said, echoing her earlier tweet. "But I think mockery undermines the very essence of meaningful dialogue. We should challenge each other's ideas, sure, but we shouldn't dismiss someone outright without hearing them out." Her response struck a chord. It wasn't overly emotional or aggressive. It was measured, respectful, and grounded. Even viewers who hadn't been fans before found themselves nodding along. Here was someone who understood the power of words, not just to hurt, but to heal and inspire. By refusing to stoop to insults, she elevated the entire conversation. As the interview went on, Leavitt proved herself to be more than just a calm presence. She was sharp, informed, and unafraid to tackle tough questions. When Gutfeld brought up criticisms about her being propped up by partisan forces, she smiled and said, "If standing up for principles makes me partisan, then so be it. But I'd argue that my views aren't defined by any one group. They're shaped by my experiences and values." The audience erupted in applause, clearly impressed by her ability to navigate tricky terrain without losing her cool. By the end of the segment, it was clear something remarkable had happened. Leavitt hadn't just survived the spotlight, she had thrived in it. Social media lit up once again, this time with praise pouring in from unexpected places. Liberals who had initially dismissed her admitted she handled herself admirably. Conservatives hailed her as a rising star. Even some of Crockett's supporters grudgingly acknowledged that Leavitt had proven herself worthy of attention. For Greg Gutfeld, the victory was sweet. Not only had he successfully amplified Leavitt's voice, but he'd also exposed the flaws in Crockett's argument. During the closing moments of the show, he quipped, "You know, Congresswoman Crockett probably thought she was throwing shade. Turns out she was shining a spotlight." The audience roared with laughter, but there was truth in his words. Every attempt Crockett made to discredit Leavitt only made her stronger. Backstage, Leavitt exhaled deeply, allowing herself a brief moment of relief. She knew this was just the beginning. The attention wouldn't fade anytime soon, and she'd need to keep proving herself day after day. But for now, she felt proud of how far she'd come, and excited about where she might go next. As for Crockett, the cracks in her armor were starting to show. Her attempts to pivot back to policy discussions fell flat, overshadowed by the ongoing fallout from her initial remarks. Critics began questioning whether her approach was helping or hurting her cause. One political analyst summed it up best. "When you focus too much on tearing others down, you risk losing sight of your own message." By the time the week wrapped up, it was clear the controversy had reshaped the landscape. Ratings for the Greg Gutfeld show soared to new heights. Book deals, speaking engagements, and podcast offers flooded in for Leavitt. And as for Crockett, well, she was learning the hard way that words carry weight, and sometimes they come back to haunt you. By the time the weekend rolled around, it was clear that something had shifted. The controversy wasn't just fading into the background, it was growing sharper, more intense, and impossible to ignore. Jasmine Crockett's initial comment about Karoline Leavitt had spiraled far beyond a casual jab on late-night TV. It had become a referendum on respect, fairness, and how we treat new voices in politics. And as the dust settled, one thing was undeniable. The tables were turning. Karoline Leavitt had entered the spotlight reluctantly, but now she owned it. Her appearance on the Greg Gutfeld show had been a masterclass in poise and composure. She didn't raise her voice or throw insults back at Crockett. Instead, she chose to rise above the noise, focusing on ideas rather than personal attacks. This approach resonated deeply with viewers who were tired of divisive rhetoric dominating the headlines. People started seeing her not just as a commentator, but as someone who represented a broader movement, a push for thoughtful, respectful discourse in an era defined by shouting matches. As her popularity surged, so did the opportunities. Within days, Leavitt was fielding calls from publishers eager to offer her a book deal. Podcast hosts wanted her on their shows. Universities invited her to speak at events aimed at inspiring young people to engage in politics. Even brands began reaching out, asking if she'd partner with them for campaigns targeting younger audiences. Suddenly, Leavitt wasn't just a name being tossed around online. She was becoming a household figure, a symbol of what could happen when you stayed calm under pressure and let your actions speak louder than anyone else's words. But while Leavitt's star was rising, Jasmine Crockett found herself increasingly isolated. Her attempts to defend her comments came across as stubborn rather than principled. Every time she appeared on a news program or gave an interview, she seemed to dig herself deeper into a hole. Critics pointed out that her refusal to apologize or even acknowledge the impact of her words made her look tone-deaf. In an age where public figures are often judged not just by what they say but how they handle criticism, Crockett's stance felt outdated. Things got worse when some members of her own party started distancing themselves. One Democratic strategist, speaking anonymously to a major outlet, said, "Jasmine went too far this time. You can disagree without belittling someone's abilities, especially when they're trying to contribute constructively." Those words stung because they came from within her own camp. For a politician whose career depended on building alliances and maintaining credibility, losing support from her colleagues was a red flag no one could ignore. On the Gutfeld show, Greg continued to drive the narrative forward. He dedicated entire segments to analyzing Crockett's missteps, using humor and sharp commentary to highlight the absurdity of dismissing someone based solely on age or experience. Clips of Leavitt's calm, articulate responses were replayed, alongside moments where Crockett stumbled over her explanations. The contrast was glaring, almost comedic. "You know," Gutfeld joked during one episode, "if Congresswoman Crockett wanted to boost Karoline's profile, she really nailed it. Maybe she should charge her as a consultant." The audience loved it. They laughed, cheered, and shared the clips online, amplifying the message even further. But beneath the humor, there was a serious undertone. Gutfeld wasn't just making fun of Crockett. He was challenging viewers to think critically about why these kinds of dismissals matter. Why do we judge young voices so harshly? What does it say about us when we mock someone before giving them a chance to prove themselves? For many watching, the answer was clear. It says we're afraid of change. Young voices like Leavitt's represent a shift in power dynamics, a challenge to the status quo. By mocking them, critics aren't just attacking individuals, they're resisting progress itself. And as the debate unfolded, more and more people began siding with Leavitt, not necessarily because they agreed with her politics, but because they admired her resilience and grace. Even those who initially defended Crockett started to waver. Some admitted privately that her comments felt unnecessarily harsh, especially given the backlash against divisive language in modern politics. Others argued that while disagreement is healthy, mockery shuts down dialogue before it even begins. A few columnists even wrote pieces suggesting that Crockett's remarks revealed a deeper issue, a lack of patience for diverse perspectives in leadership roles. Amid all this, Karoline Leavitt kept pushing forward. She didn't gloat or revel in her newfound fame. Instead, she used the platform to talk about issues she cared about: education reform, economic opportunity, and bridging divides between generations. In interviews, she emphasized the importance of listening to each other, even when we disagree. "We don't have to agree on everything," she said during one appearance, "but we do need to create space for honest conversations. That's how we move forward." Her message struck a chord, particularly among younger viewers who felt disillusioned with traditional politics. To them, Leavitt wasn't just another talking head. She was proof that fresh ideas could break through even in a system stacked against them. Social media buzzed with posts praising her authenticity and determination. Memes comparing her to real-life superheroes popped up everywhere. Supporters created hashtags like "You Young Voices Matter" and "Respect the Future," turning the controversy into a rallying cry for generational change. For Greg Gutfeld, the whole saga reinforced his reputation as a provocateur with a purpose. His show wasn't just entertainment, it was a mirror reflecting society's flaws and strengths. By shining a light on the debate, he forced viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about bias, representation, and the power of words. Ratings soared as audiences tuned in nightly, eager to see what he'd say next. Would he invite Crockett onto the show for a face-to-face showdown? Would he bring in more experts to weigh in? No one knew for sure, but everyone was hooked. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett faced mounting pressure to address the situation head-on. Rumors swirled that her team was scrambling to salvage her image, drafting statements and planning PR strategies to win back public trust. But every attempt felt off-key, as if they were missing the point entirely. Viewers weren't looking for spin, they wanted accountability. They wanted to see someone willing to admit when they'd made a mistake and learn from it. By the end of the week, it was clear that the fallout had reshaped the landscape. Karoline Leavitt had emerged stronger, more confident and more influential than ever before. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, was left grappling with the consequences of her words, and wondering whether she'd underestimated the power of a single remark. In the world of politics and media, timing is everything. Sometimes, a moment comes along that changes the game entirely. For Karoline Leavitt, this was her moment. And for Jasmine Crockett, it was a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. By the start of the following week, it was clear that Jasmine Crockett's attempts to control the narrative were falling apart. Her initial confidence had begun to crack under the weight of relentless scrutiny. What started as a single comment on late-night TV had snowballed into something much bigger, a national debate about fairness, respect, and the value of new voices in politics. And as the pressure mounted, Crockett found herself struggling to keep up. Every time she appeared on television or gave an interview, the same questions kept coming back at her. Why dismiss someone outright without engaging with their ideas? Wasn't this exactly the kind of behavior people criticized in divisive political rhetoric? Each time Crockett tried to defend herself, but her answers felt rehearsed and defensive. She stuck to her guns, insisting that her critique of Karoline Leavitt was valid and grounded in reality. "I stand by what I said," she repeated during one particularly tense exchange. "She's being propped up by partisan forces, not merit." But viewers weren't buying it anymore. Clips of Leavitt's calm, articulate responses were everywhere, on social media, late-night shows, and even morning news programs. Every time Crockett doubled down on her remarks, someone would counter with footage of Leavitt holding her own in tough interviews. It became impossible to ignore the contrast between the two women. While Leavitt focused on substance and solutions, Crockett seemed stuck in a cycle of defensiveness, unable to pivot away from the controversy. Things took a turn for the worse when some of her colleagues started speaking out. A few members of her own party, who had initially stayed silent, began voicing concerns about her approach. One prominent strategist appearing on a cable news show said bluntly, "Mocking someone based on age or experience is never a good look. It makes us seem out of touch, especially when we're supposed to be championing inclusivity." The remark sent shockwaves through political circles. If Crockett couldn't count on support from her own side, how could she expect to win over critics? Meanwhile, Greg Gutfeld continued to dominate the conversation on his show. He didn't let up for a second, dedicating entire segments to dissecting Crockett's missteps. Using humor and sharp analysis, he highlighted the contradictions in her arguments. "Here's the thing," he quipped during one episode, leaning forward with that trademark smirk. "If you want to criticize someone, fine. But make sure your argument holds water. Otherwise, all you're doing is handing them a megaphone." The audience loved it. They laughed, clapped, and shared clips online, turning Gutfeld's commentary into viral moments. But beneath the jokes, there was a deeper message. He wasn't just mocking Crockett. He was challenging viewers to think critically about why these kinds of dismissals matter. Why do we judge young voices so harshly? What does it say about us when we mock someone before giving them a chance to prove themselves? As the days went on, Crockett's situation grew increasingly dire. Poll numbers began to reflect the damage. Her approval ratings dipped noticeably, while interest in Karoline Leavitt surged. Even casual observers noticed the shift. People who hadn't paid much attention to politics before were suddenly curious about this young commentator everyone was talking about. Book deals, speaking engagements, and podcast offers poured in for Leavitt, further solidifying her place in the spotlight. For Crockett, the breaking point came during a live interview on a popular morning show. The host pressed her repeatedly about whether she regretted her comments, framing the question in a way that left little room for evasion. "Do you think dismissing someone outright does more harm than good?" the host asked pointedly. "Because it feels like you're shutting down dialogue rather than encouraging it." Crockett hesitated, clearly caught off guard. For a moment she looked unsure of herself, a rare glimpse of vulnerability from someone usually so confident. Finally she responded, "Look, I don't apologize for my critique. But maybe there's room for both perspectives here." It was a weak attempt at reconciliation, and it landed flat. Critics pounced immediately, accusing her of trying to have it both ways. Social media erupted with memes and sarcastic captions mocking her vague non-apology. Back on the Gutfeld show, Gutfeld wasted no time addressing the moment. "Oh wow," he said, shaking his head with exaggerated disbelief. "First, she tears someone down. Then she says, maybe there's room for both perspectives. You can't insult someone and then act like you're being open-minded. Pick a lane." The audience roared with laughter, but there was truth in his words. Viewers nodded along, agreeing that Crockett's response felt insincere and calculated. As the backlash intensified, Crockett faced mounting pressure to issue a genuine apology. Her team reportedly debated behind the scenes whether to release a formal statement, but ultimately decided against it. Instead, they encouraged her to focus on policy issues, hoping to steer the conversation away from the controversy. But it was too late. The damage had been done and the public wasn't ready to move on. In a surprising twist, Crockett eventually extended an olive branch, not through a public apology, but through an invitation. She reached out to Karoline Leavitt, suggesting they collaborate on bipartisan initiatives aimed at empowering young voices in politics. It was an unexpected move, one that left many scratching their heads. Was this a sincere effort to mend fences, or simply a PR tactic to salvage her image? Reactions were mixed. Some praised Crockett for taking a step toward reconciliation, while others dismissed it as too little, too late. Supporters of Leavitt argued that actions speak louder than words. If Crockett truly wanted to make amends, she needed to demonstrate it through consistent behavior, not empty gestures. For Leavitt, the invitation presented a dilemma. On one hand, working across party lines aligned with her values and goals. On the other hand, accepting might be seen as letting Crockett off the hook. In the end, she chose to respond diplomatically, thanking Crockett for the gesture and expressing openness to future collaboration. "Constructive dialogue is always welcome," she tweeted. "Let's focus on finding common ground and moving forward together." The response earned widespread praise, further cementing Leavitt's reputation as someone willing to rise above petty disputes. Even critics admitted that her handling of the situation was impressive. Meanwhile, Crockett's olive branch did little to repair her standing. Many viewed it as a last-ditch effort to regain control of a narrative that had spiraled far beyond her grasp. By the end of the week, it was clear that the controversy had reshaped the landscape. Karoline Leavitt had emerged stronger, more respected and more influential than ever before. She had proven that resilience and grace could turn criticism into opportunity. As for Jasmine Crockett, she learned the hard way that words carry weight, and sometimes they come back to haunt you in ways you never expected. For Gutfeld, the saga reinforced his role as a cultural provocateur capable of shaping conversations. His show didn't just entertain, it challenged viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about bias, representation, and the power of words. Ratings soared as audiences tuned in nightly, eager to see what he'd say next. Would he invite both women onto the show for a face-to-face discussion? Would he continue to push the boundaries of political discourse? No one knew for sure, but everyone was hooked. And as the dust settled, one lesson stood out above all else. In the world of politics and media, every word matters. Whether spoken casually or carefully crafted, words have the power to build bridges, or burn them down. This story was proof of that, and its impact would be felt for a long time to come. As the dust finally began to settle, the controversy that had captivated the nation for weeks started to fade from the headlines. But its impact lingered, leaving behind a trail of lessons that resonated far beyond the world of politics and late-night television. For everyone involved, Karoline Leavitt, Jasmine Crockett, Gutfeld, and even the millions of viewers who followed along, it was a moment that forced reflection on bigger issues about communication, respect, and the future of public discourse. For Karoline Leavitt, this whole experience marked a turning point in her career. What began as a single dismissive comment had transformed her into a symbol of resilience and determination. She didn't ask for any of it, but she handled it with such grace and poise that people couldn't help but take notice. Her decision to rise above the noise, focus on ideas rather than insults, and use the platform wisely earned her respect across political lines. Even those who disagreed with her views admitted that she represented something important, a reminder that young voices deserve to be heard, especially when they bring fresh perspectives to the table. Leavitt wasn't naive enough to think the road ahead would be easy. She knew there would still be critics, doubters, and moments where she'd feel like giving up. But she also knew she had proven herself capable of navigating tough situations without losing sight of her values. In interviews, she often talked about how the backlash taught her the importance of patience and perspective. "You can't control what other people say or do," she said during one appearance. "But you can control how you respond, and sometimes staying calm is the strongest thing you can do." Her newfound fame came with opportunities and challenges. Book deals, speaking engagements, and podcast offers poured in, each presenting a chance to share her story and amplify her message. But Leavitt remained grounded, focusing less on personal gain and more on using her platform to inspire others. She spoke passionately about the need for respectful dialogue, urging people to listen to one another even when they disagreed. "We don't have to agree on everything," she often said, "but we do need to create space for honest conversations. That's how we move forward." For Jasmine Crockett, the aftermath of the controversy was humbling. Her initial comments, meant to critique someone she saw as overhyped, had spiraled out of control, overshadowing her policy work and damaging her reputation. While she maintained her stance, she also faced pressure to adapt, to recognize the power of words and the importance of fostering inclusivity, even in disagreement. Some interpreted her olive branch to Leavitt as a sincere effort to make amends. Others dismissed it as damage control. Either way, the episode served as a wake-up call. The biggest lesson Crockett seemed to learn was that mockery doesn't advance ideas, it stifles them. By dismissing Leavitt outright, she unintentionally highlighted the very issue many young voices face: being judged before given a fair chance. It was a costly mistake, both personally and professionally, but one that offered an opportunity for growth. Whether she chose to embrace that opportunity remained to be seen, but the experience undoubtedly shaped how she approached public discourse moving forward. Gutfeld, meanwhile, emerged from the saga stronger than ever. His role in amplifying the debate showcased his unique ability to blend humor with sharp social commentary. He didn't just entertain, he challenged viewers to think critically about why these kinds of controversies matter. Through his monologues and segments, he framed the discussion not as a clash between two personalities, but as a broader reflection of societal biases and generational divides. Ratings soared, proving that audiences were hungry for meaningful conversations wrapped in wit and satire. But perhaps the most significant takeaway from the entire ordeal was the reminder of how interconnected we all are. Words have weight. They shape perceptions, influence opinions, and leave lasting impressions. Mockery might feel satisfying in the moment, but it rarely solves anything. Respectful dialogue, on the other hand, opens doors, builds bridges, and creates opportunities for understanding. Viewers weren't just passive observers in this drama, they were active participants. Social media played a crucial role in shaping the narrative, with hashtags, memes, and viral clips keeping the conversation alive. People debated passionately, sharing their thoughts and challenging each other's perspectives. Families discussed it over dinner. Friends argued about it over coffee. Even classrooms incorporated it into discussions about civics and media literacy. The controversy became a catalyst for deeper conversations about fairness, representation, and the responsibilities that come with having a platform. For younger generations watching, the story carried extra significance. It reinforced the idea that age doesn't define credibility, that passion, preparation, and perseverance can earn you a seat at the table, no matter how stacked the odds may seem. Leavitt's journey inspired countless young people to speak up, stay true to themselves, and trust that their voices matter. It reminded them that while criticism is inevitable, it can also be a stepping stone to growth. As the weeks turned into months, life slowly returned to normal, for some at least. Leavitt continued to build her career, leveraging the attention to push for policies she believed in. Crockett worked to rebuild her image, hoping to regain the trust she'd lost. Gutfeld kept doing what he did best, shining a light on cultural moments and sparking debates that made people think. And the rest of the country moved on, carrying with them the lessons learned from a seemingly small remark that grew into something much larger. In the end, the story wasn't really about Karoline Leavitt or Jasmine Crockett, or even Greg Gutfeld. It was about us, about how we communicate, how we treat each other, and how we navigate a world increasingly divided by differences. It was a reminder that every word we say has the potential to heal or harm, to unite or divide. And it was proof that even in the messiest, most chaotic moments, there's always room for growth, if we're willing to listen, reflect, and learn. Because in the grand scheme of things, politics isn't just about policies or parties. It's about people. And the choices we make, what we say, how we say it, and why, shape the kind of world we live in. This story showed us that loud and clear.